Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe, and hit the bell icon for latest updates. For many years, Jay Leno seemed like the perfect guy. He was America's nice late-night TV host, a hard-working, funny man, and the king of car lovers who always wore jeans. He was born in New Rochelle, New York, and grew up in Andover, Massachusetts. Jay built his career from nothing, doing comedy shows in small clubs before becoming a regular on The Tonight Show. When he took over from Johnny Carson in 1992, everyone knew his name. People loved his quick jokes, friendly personality, and his life that seemed free from drama. Besides TV, Jay had another big love that made him famous: his amazing car collection. He kept it in a huge building in Burbank called the Big Dog Garage. It had hundreds of cars, from super expensive ones to test cars that companies made. He didn't just collect them. He fixed them, drove them, and showed them to people at events, charity shows, and later on his TV show called Jay Leno's Garage. To his fans, Jay had the dream life. He was famous, rich, and got to spend every day around the cars he loved. On TV and in interviews, Jay acted like a regular, humble guy. He stayed away from gossip magazines, stayed married to his wife Mavis since 1980, and said he lived simply. He claimed he never spent his Tonight Show money and only lived off the money he made doing stand-up comedy. It was the perfect good guy story. He worked hard, stayed loyal, and was thankful for his success. But people who knew him well saw another side. This side was less public, more planned out, and very protective of his work and car collection. In Hollywood, people whispered about late-night TV fights, aggressive business moves, and how competitive he was to stay on top for so many years. In the car world, people quietly talked about deals he made secretly before auctions or public sales. For most people, this was just background talk. But for some insiders, these were warning signs that Jay's rise and his empire came with a cost. While most fans knew Jay as the smiling, friendly car guy, people in the fancy collector world sometimes told a different story. Leno's Garage wasn't built by accident. It came from years of careful hunting, smart dealing, and sometimes super quick moves that left other buyers upset. Stories came up about rare cars, old Bugattis, vintage Lamborghinis, and prototype muscle cars that were supposed to go to private sales. But then Jay would show up with a better offer and close the deal before others could even try to bid. For some people, this was just how high-level collecting worked. Move fast, spend big money, and win. For others, it showed how competitive Jay could be when he wanted something. In this special world, what people think of you is everything. One aggressive buy can cause problems for years. Jay never talked about these whispers in public. But mechanics, dealers, and auction insiders hinted that his easygoing TV personality had a calculating side. He could quietly position himself as the sure buyer for cars he wanted. It wasn't about being greedy. It was about passion, control, and sometimes making sure a piece of car history ended up in his hands instead of disappearing into a private storage place. But the whispers kept going, and they weren't the only ones. If the car world saw Leno as a tough competitor, Hollywood saw him as a master planner. The late-night TV world in the 90s and 2000s was like a battlefield, and Jay's fight with David Letterman was legendary. When Johnny Carson retired, many people thought Letterman would get The Tonight Show. Instead, NBC gave it to Leno, starting years of tension and ratings wars. But the bigger controversy came in 2010 with the Conan O'Brien mess. NBC had promised Conan The Tonight Show, moving Leno to a primetime slot. When Leno's show failed, the network moved him back to late night, pushing Conan out completely. In public, Leno said it was the network's decision, but industry insiders whispered that Jay's behind the scenes pushing played a much bigger role. Some colleagues saw it as ruthless, others as protecting himself. These moves didn't destroy his public image. Most viewers still saw him as the likable host. But among comedians and TV insiders, these events painted a more strategic, even cutthroat side of Leno. It was around this time that people close to Jay began dropping hints, not in public, but in interviews, podcasts, and private talks. A friend might comment on how Jay doesn't sleep, or how he's always working an angle. Others pointed out how he never truly let his guard down, even with people he trusted. Some of these warnings weren't about being mean. They were about pace. Jay's nonstop work ethic was legendary. He'd finish a week of taping The Tonight Show, then fly to do stand-up shows on the weekend, then spend Monday morning back in the garage before heading to the studio again. It was a schedule that left little room for rest, thinking, or even basic safety. Looking back, some believe this drive, paired with his fiercely protective nature over his projects, wasn't something he could keep up forever. But at the time, it just looked like Jay being Jay. The whispers of he needs to slow down were drowned out by applause, laughter, and the steady sound of an engine somewhere in Burbank. On November 12, 2022, the warnings became real. Jay was working on a 1907 White Steam car inside his Burbank garage, an old car powered not by gasoline alone, but by a complex steam system. While checking a fuel line, gasoline sprayed onto his face and upper body, and a single spark lit it instantly. Flames covered him in seconds. A longtime friend and mechanic, Dave Kaki, acted fast, pulling Jay to the ground, putting out the flames, and rushing him to a burn center. Leno got severe second and third degree burns to his face, chest, and hands. In public, Jay brushed it off with jokes about needing a new face anyway. But behind the scenes, doctors warned how close he'd come to life-threatening injury. For some of his inner circle, this was the moment they had feared. Years of constant activity in the garage, handling dangerous fuels, and pushing deadlines had created a place where one wrong move could be deadly. Yet within weeks, Jay was back. First in interviews, then behind the wheel. He even returned to stand up just days after leaving the hospital. Admirable? Absolutely. But to those who had been warning him for years, it confirmed the truth. Jay wasn't going to slow down no matter how close he came to disaster. In the tight-knit world of elite car collectors, there's an unspoken rule. Respect the chase, respect the find. But Jay's unmatched resources and relentless pursuit sometimes ruffled feathers. Stories went around about rare cars, Duesenbergs, McLarens, even historically significant prototypes that other collectors had quietly been negotiating for, only to have Leno step in, make a decisive cash offer, and close the deal. To outsiders, this was simply capitalism. To insiders, it was more complicated. Some accused him of using his fame and network to bypass the usual politeness, getting vehicles that might otherwise have gone to museums or longtime collectors. Leno himself has always said that his purchases preserve history, that he saves cars from neglect and makes sure they're driven, not locked away. The truth likely sits in the middle. Jay's passion is unquestionable. But in a field where relationships matter as much as money, even a well-meaning move can be seen as a power play. And for those who lost a once-in-a-lifetime car to Leno's lightning-fast deal-making, the sting lingered. Jay Leno built a career on never stopping. During his Tonight Show years, he never took a sick day, never missed a show, and did stand-up nearly every weekend. He claimed to have no interest in vacations. But over time, the cost of that pace began to show. Not in public meltdowns or scandals, but in subtle ways. Friends noticed he skipped family gatherings. Crew members remembered how filming days stretched long into the night, even when there was no urgent deadline. Leno himself admitted in interviews that he feared doing nothing more than he feared being tired. It wasn't about money. By the time he left The Tonight Show, he'd earned hundreds of millions. It was about motion, about identity. Insiders say that when the garage accident happened, they hoped it would be the signal for Jay to slow down. But if anything, it made his need to keep moving stronger. He saw recovery as another challenge to beat. While that mindset made him a legend, it also kept him locked in a cycle where rest wasn't just rare, it was unacceptable. To millions, Jay Leno was the same man on stage and off, approachable, generous, quick with a joke. And much of that was true. He gave to charities quietly, visited sick fans without cameras, and treated his staff with a loyalty that lasted decades. But the Jay his closest friends knew was also deeply strategic. In private, Leno was careful about his image. He rarely showed weakness, even to people who had worked beside him for years. He avoided drama in public, But behind closed doors, he managed his career moves with a precision that could rival a CEO. Some saw this as discipline. Others saw it as being guarded. He was generous, yes, but also fiercely protective of his time, his collection, and his control over both. He's not mean, one former Tonight Show worker said. He just keeps everything close to his chest. He's always 2 steps ahead. It was a side of Leno that didn't make it into the light-hearted headlines, but it was key to how he'd kept his empire intact for decades. In recent years, those closest to Jay have grown more direct with their concerns. Friends urged him to take fewer risks in the garage. Fellow collectors warned that his aggressive pace of buying and restoring cars was unsustainable. Even fans online began urging him to slow down and enjoy it after his burn accident and later a motorcycle crash in January 2023 that broke multiple bones. For most people, 2 serious accidents in 2 months would be the ultimate wake-up call. But for Leno, it was just another set of obstacles to overcome. He returned to work almost immediately, joking in interviews about the incidents. The humor masked what others saw as a dangerous refusal to change course. To some, it was admirable toughness. To others, it was proof that the warnings about his pace, his risks, his unwillingness to rest had been ignored for too long. Jay Leno's legacy is enormous. He's one of the most successful late-night hosts in history, a stand-up comedy workhorse, and the owner of one of the most important private car collections in the world. His influence on both television and car culture is undeniable. Yet the question remains, will that legacy be remembered purely for its achievements or also for the stubbornness that kept him pushing forward despite the dangers? His fans see a man living life to the fullest. His friends see a man who could lose it all in a flash of fuel and fire. As of now, Jay Leno shows no signs of stopping. Maybe he never will. Maybe for him, slowing down would mean letting go of the very thing that's kept him in motion for over 40 years. The warnings are still there, but whether they're listened to or simply become part of his legend is a chapter only he can write.